for joining us today. My name is Michelle Trevetti, and I am a parent of a 23-year-old with autism, and she has been doing ABA therapy since she was 4 years old and continues to do that as an adult. So we, as parents, have been through quite a journey with health insurance coverage under various types of health insurance plans personally. And then also my background professionally is I have a master's in health administration and worked for a large hospital system doing health benefit design for their self-insured HMO, and also managing ambulatory practices and doing managed care contracting for those providers. So having that background in managed care and in insurance was so beneficial just for our family personally when we ran into all kinds of health insurance issues trying to get my daughter coverage back in 2000 when she was first diagnosed. So part of what I do in terms of both my volunteer work and current professional work is working with various organizations just to help educate parents, caregivers, and self-advocates about health insurance and about their rights under the type of health plan they have, and just educating people in general about health equity and the health insurance system that we have in our country, because it's very complex. It's mainly employer-based with also public options, which we'll talk about. And it can be a maze, and it can be very difficult even for the most savvy consumer to understand their health insurance and to try and figure out what's covered and what isn't covered and how is it going to be covered. So my focus today is on autism and autism treatment and giving you some information about how to tell if your plan should be covering autism, is covering autism. And then we're getting into open enrollment season. My family just finished open enrollment for my daughter. And so we're getting into that season where you have to pick your health plan. And that can be a very, very big decision. And so knowing what to look for in those plans will make that hopefully a little bit easier this year for you. So when I get calls a lot from families in the fall, their open enrollment packet is due next week, and they say, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield, or I have Anthem, or I have Humana. Is autism covered? Well, then we get to play 20 questions, because it's really not about if you have Anthem or Humana or Aetna or CareSource or whatever the insurance carrier may be, because they may just be an administrator for that plan. They may be an administrator for a TRICARE plan. They may be an administrator for a federal employee plan. What really matters is what type of insurance you have and which laws and regulations apply to that particular plan. And every single insurance carrier, whether it's Aetna, Humana, Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, can have hundreds of plans that are all different in terms of which laws and which regulations apply. Because we have to think about what federal laws apply, and then we have to think about what state laws apply, and then how those interact together to define what your health plan needs to do. And our system in our country, because it is employer-based with public options like Medicare and Medicaid, that makes it so complicated, because it also depends a lot on what your employer wants to cover and what your employer has negotiated. And then also, if you're involved with an employer that has union workers, there's, layers of negotiation on the union side that also contribute to that. So that's what, really contributes to the complexity, which makes it so much more complex and confusing for consumers. So I'm going to hopefully give you some tools to be able to look at your plan, talk to your human resources or benefits person, and get some good information so that you can make the best decision when it's time to pick your health plan. And then to also understand what your health plan offers, and if you have better alternatives via other coverage for your loved one with autism. So the 20 questions game comes into play there, where we have to ask all kinds of questions about what type of employer is the insurance through? Is it through an employer, or is it through the Affordable Care Act marketplace? Is it through Medicaid? Do you have a primary insurance that's employer-based with Medicaid as secondary for your loved one with autism? Because then all of those things come into play in terms of what will be covered and what won't. So we'll try to make this a little bit more simple. And one big word of caution: I get a lot of phone calls in January, February, March from families who are surprised. They say, well, autism and ABA was covered last year, and I'm with the same employer, and I'm still with Anthem, or I'm still with Aetna, or I'm still with Humana, but now they're saying that there are these limits on ABA, or that they're not covering ABA anymore. So just because your employer-based insurance covered certain services last year for autism treatment does not mean that they will be covered in the next year. And the same goes for medications. Both services and medications can change on a year-to-year basis, because an employer can change their insurance contract on a year-to-year basis. They can also change the type of insurance that they're offering on a year-to-year basis. So that's why it's important to keep on top of that and to ask a lot of questions, and to make sure that autism indeed is going to continue to be covered in the way that you have experienced it in the past. Okay, now if you have an employer-based health insurance plan, there are several buckets that can fall into, but these are the two most common. Most employer-based insurance is what's called ERISA, or self-insured, self-funded. And kind of to really simplify that down, what that basically means is the employer is actually kind of acting like the insurance company, because they are taking the financial risk for the healthcare costs for their employees and their dependents. And they are also directly paying those claims. So they're taking the financial risk for those costs. They may pay those claims through a Humana or an Aetna or an Anthem, called a third-party administrator. So it may look like, oh, I've got Anthem. I had Anthem last year, or I had Humana last year. But you may have had a fully funded plan last year, and now you have a self-funded plan this year, and the rules are completely different. So it's really important, first and foremost, if your main insurance comes from your employer, is to know upfront, is my employer a self-funded employer where they are taking that risk for the employee's healthcare, or are they fully funded, meaning that they really are just buying the health insurance directly from an insurance carrier, and they are not a financial risk for the claims or for the healthcare costs. The carrier is the one that has the financial risk for that. So the ERISA, or self-funded plan, on the employer side, they are federally regulated. So they are regulated under this ERISA law, this ERISA. And so their regulator is the United States Department of Labor. And at the end of the day, the employer is really the ultimate decision maker about what gets covered, what doesn't get covered. And they also, under ERISA law, have a fiduciary role. And what that means is a fiduciary is responsible for acting in the best interests of their beneficiary. So this becomes important if there are problems with insurance coverage under ERISA plan, because not only are there certain regulations on the federal level that they need to follow, but they also have this fiduciary role of needing to make decisions in terms of coverage, such as medical necessity review criteria or benefit limitations. Those decisions need to be made with their fiduciary role in mind, meaning that cost and expense cannot be the sole driving factor of how they decide what's going to be covered. They do have to, as a fiduciary, be very mindful and act in the best interest of the beneficiaries of the plan. So that's can be a significant protection under ERISA or self-regulated plans. Then on the other side, we have our fully funded or our fully insured plans. Those are regulated by each state. So that's fun because the states, we have 50 states, and all 50 states have different insurance regulations and different insurance laws based on what their legislatures have passed. And so your state department of insurance, or whatever they happen to call it, they may call it something different, but you'll want to go to your state's regulator that is in charge of health insurance coverage and enforcing the laws of health insurance coverage in your state. They will be one of your main resources for what needs to be covered, what rules need to be followed, what if you have an autism mandate law or bulletin or regulation in your state, what would need to be covered under that plan. And as I alluded to earlier, under this type of plan, since the insurance carrier, the Anthem, Humana, Aetna, is the one that's taking the financial risk for the claims and for the employer's, the employee's health costs, the insurance carrier is the ultimate decision maker. The employer will negotiate what kind of plan they want and what kind of contract they want based on what price they want to pay and, and other factors such as that. But at the end of the day, the carrier offers the plans to the employer, and then the employer chooses from that menu of available plans. And then fully funded or fully insured plans have to follow state mandates, whereas ERISA or self-insured federally regulated plans do not necessarily have to follow state mandates. So we see this in states that did pass autism mandate laws, that families often get confused because they say, well, I'm in Indiana and our autism mandate is over 20 years old, but my insurance isn't covering ABA and isn't covering autism. Why is that? Well, it's an employer-based plan that is probably ERISA, doesn't have to follow federal mental health parity law, a few other things coming into play there. But so just because you live in a mandate law state for autism does not necessarily mean that your plan is going to automatically cover autism, because it might be under federal regulation, not state regulation. I hope that makes sense, because that's kind of the biggest thing to find out about your plan initially, so you know what your rights are. Then the other most popular means of insuring our loved ones with autism is on the public sector side, public funded health insurance, and typically through Medicaid, because our loved ones may qualify for a Medicaid waiver and then subsequently disability Medicaid. Some states call it traditional Medicaid, but you also may be in a managed Medicaid state where all Medicaid is provided through managed care plans, such as those offered by the typical insurance carriers that you see. So again, this can create confusion with families, because they may have an employer-based plan that's with one carrier, say Anthem, and then their loved one with autism may be on their employer-based insurance as primary, but then they also may be on Medicaid as secondary, but that Medicaid is run by the same carrier or a different carrier. So they may have that confusion of trying to balance between not only two carriers, but then also looking at these plans are basically run by very different rules. So it's not just I'm a football fan. And so, it's not the same rules. It's like a completely different game when you get into Medicaid versus get into private insurance. Different rules, different game. So that could be very confusing for families. So one thing I do definitely recommend is look at your state and what advocacy resources are available in your state to get information on health insurance. Because it can be a maze, and it definitely has some specific knowledge to this industry. And so it can be very helpful to get engaged with an advocate to help you kind of figure out what the rules of the road are for your particular plan. So Medicaid is a federal and state partnership. So there's going to be federal regulations that go along with it. And the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, is the federal level regulator, along with Health and Human Services, that will determine at kind of a floor level what Medicaid needs to cover and how it gets covered, and provides guidelines to the states about how they should cover things. But then when kind of the rubber meets the road, there's this partnership with the states. And so your state-based social services entity will be the administrator for the Medicaid plan, and will also have state laws and regulations that pertain to your particular state's Medicaid program. And so it can be very confusing for families, especially if they live, kind of bordering another state. They may have two completely different types of Medicaid systems, even though they're, only 20 miles apart or something like that. So do keep in mind that Medicaid is very state specific. And so you'll want to make sure to connect with advocates in your state to get the best and most up-to-date information about how things are being currently covered in your state via Medicaid. But I will touch on some of the federally, required things that need to be covered. Okay. And then a third type of insurance that's very common for our families to use for their loved ones with autism is an Affordable Care Act marketplace plan. Again, these vary state by state because they are a federal and state partnership. They're also considered to be private insurance, but the government is involved in terms of giving subsidies, and also involved in terms of enforcement of the state's particular essential health benefits benchmark. And since each state was able to pick their own essential health benefits benchmark plan, that is why there's some difference among states as to whether or not autism and ABA is covered under the marketplace plans. So you will definitely want to look at that if you're looking at your state and thinking that this may be a good option for you and your family. It's used quite a bit by people who are self-employed, by folks who work for small businesses that don't offer health insurance coverage, but it's also used, and at least in our state, it's also used by families who they may have a employer-based health plan, and they may get information that states that autism ought to be covered, or autism's covered, but ABA is not covered. And they've kind of done the calculation that fighting my employer and fighting my insurance plan is going to take months and months. And I don't know if I want to do that. And I don't know if I have the time and the energy and the funds to do that. So they may put their loved one with autism on a marketplace plan in order to access autism treatment as more quickly, either while they're doing appeals and regulatory enforcement with their employer-based plan, or they just put their loved one with autism on the marketplace plan because, just quite frankly, life is tough with autism and it's one more fight they don't want to deal with. And so if that is an option in your state, it's definitely one to consider, depending on your individual circumstances and what is available to you via an employer or via Medicaid as well. Let's see. Now, just one thing that I did put in here is I did a search of the Autism Speaks website, and they try their best to keep up to date, which states marketplace plans cover autism and ABA and which don't. And so this is the most up-to-date information that they have currently on their website about which states include ABA in their essential health benefits package. And that is 33 states plus the District of Columbia. But keep in mind that as legal cases evolve and as state legislatures do their work, this is subject to change. So you definitely want to check with your state and with the marketplace carriers in your state about the latest information in terms of autism coverage if you're in one of these states where ABA is considered to not currently be a covered benefit in the marketplace plans. Then another popular type of insurance that covers over 8 million people in our country are federal employees, the FEHB. And back in 2017, the federal employee health plan decided to add ABA for the treatment of autism into all of their plans. Some were covering it, some weren't, but as of 2017, all of the plans were supposed to be covering it. And the federal employee health plan is different again, in that it is administered by the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. And so that is the regulator and the information source that you would go to for current information about how autism is covered if you are a federal employee. And if you are in the federal employee health benefits plan. And on the Office of Personnel Management website is our fact sheets and questions and answers on coverage specifically for autism and ABA. So if this is a plan that is an option for you, I would highly encourage you to go to that website and get the latest information about what that coverage looks like and what the options are. Then lastly, in terms of health insurance options, these are some of the insurance options that I get a lot of questions about because they are the most likely to not cover autism services for various reasons. With union trusts, it really depends on what the union has negotiated and included in their benefit package. So you want to ask a lot of questions and read those plan documents very carefully and involve your union representatives in figuring out what options are available for you. And I did work with a gentleman who was in a pilots union, and they did not cover autism and ABA. He decided he did want to kind of fight the good fight with his union. And so he put his child on a marketplace plan during the 2-year process that it took, unfortunately, to work with both the company and the union. And they did change their policy, and they did end up covering autism and ABA moving forward because of his advocacy, while at the same time, his child was on a marketplace plan, got the treatment that he needed. And then the union did go back and reimburse him for that, the premiums for that insurance coverage. So that was a nice success story where he was able to access the treatment his child needed, while at the same time advocating for systemic change within his union and his company. And it was successful. And so now everyone in that union has access to autism treatment for their loved ones. And so that was a really nice success story. Some folks use church-based or faith-based health insurance or health coverage cooperatives. These are not insurance plans, so they don't carry any of the regulations that insurance plans do, but then they also don't carry any of the protections that insurance plans do in terms of like mental health parity law or the ERISA fiduciary responsibility. So you just have to be very mindful that really what's going to be covered is what the church-based cooperatives governing body decides is going to be covered, and they may or may not be open to covering autism. So you'll just want to make sure that if this is an option that you're looking into, you'll want to really make sure what's covered and take a look at how coverage decisions are made, and just keep in mind that it really is the protections that you might get from other true health insurance plans just are not available in a church-based plan. Short-term health insurance plans. These were, when the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, these went away for quite a while because short-term insurance plans are by design supposed to be just a stopgap measure between employer-based plans. So they are very, very bare bones. They do not meet essential health benefits design, and they are extremely limited in their coverage. Even things that most people would consider would be covered by their health plan without any question, like a car accident or broken leg, may be covered, but at a very, very minimal level. And so your out-of-pocket costs in these short-term plans are going to be very, very high. They're cheap for a reason. They are cheap. They're much lower cost, but they're cheap for a reason. You get what you pay for. You're going to get extremely bare bones minimal coverage, even for things as common as a broken bone or something like that. So be very cautious about these plans. They are not really designed for anyone with a chronic condition, and they are not designed to be used for an entire year or as a main source of coverage. They really were designed to just be very short term, a month or two, maybe 3 in between jobs. But their lifespans was kind of extended or was extended under the Trump administration to be able to have these plans for up to 18 months. And so that's a long time to be at risk for a health issue. We're all one accident or bad situation away from having a major health problem that's beyond our control. And so that's a lot of risk for an 18-month period of time. So just keep that in mind. And then in terms of autism, I have never seen one cover anything for autism yet. Not to say there isn't one out there that'll cover something very, very minimal, but I've never seen it. And then lastly, small government entities. I put these out as a separate category for one main reason. A lot of people access autism coverage because of mental health parity. Regardless of kind of how you feel about what autism is as a condition or as a neurodiversity, for the purposes of health insurance, because autism and its diagnostic code comes from a psychiatric book called the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatry. It is considered, for insurance purposes, most insurance purposes, a mental health condition. And so a lot of people access autism treatment because of either federal mental health parity law or their state mental health parity law, or both working together. And the Affordable Care Act extended mental health parity to many, many more insurance plans than it was covering previously to 2010. So regardless of politics and how you feel about the Affordable Care Act, the fact of the matter is that law extended federal mental health parity law to small group plans, to individual plans, and so to many, many more health plans than it was previously. And so that really opened up the door to autism treatment for many, many people. However, an employer can get an exemption from federal mental health parity law. There are a couple different ways that they can do that, but one big exemption is for small government entities. They can apply just as a small government entity with presumably just a few employees or a small level of employees. They can apply to be exempt from federal mental health parity law. So you want to keep that in mind, because I will get calls from firefighters, from city employees, and saying, you know, I thought, you know, my plan offers mental health coverage, but they won't cover autism. And I thought if they covered mental health, because of mental health parity laws, they had to cover autism. But then they find out that they are exempt from federal mental health parity law, and they've carved out their mental health treatment into an employee assistance program, which is not an insurance product. So it's outside of their insurance product. So there are just some of those little details there that are very, very confusing for families and for consumers, but that you need to be aware of, because there are several ways that a plan can be designed, and sometimes that removes some of those protections from you to access autism treatment. So if you work for a small government entity, you'll definitely want to know if they've been exempted from mental health parity law, and will also do they offer any mental health treatment that's outside of their medical plan or outside of their health plan, because that would be a clue that autism may not be covered, and you'll want to really dig deeper into that plan. This is just a resource for some information about health insurance coverage specifically for autism, that Autism Speaks does their very best to keep up to date. So I definitely would recommend checking that during your open enrollment period, just to make sure you have good up-to-date information on what's going on. And so that's one resource. Then I want to switch gears a little bit away from employer-based insurance and talk a little bit more about Medicaid, because it is a very common source of coverage for autism and ABA for children with autism. And the reason why autism and ABA has increasingly been covered under Medicaid, especially for children, is a program under Medicaid that's available to all Medicaid recipients, not just, you know, people on waivers or people in traditional disability Medicaid. And it's called EPSDT, and that stands for Early Periodic Screening, Diagnosis, and Treatment. And for a long time, we used to talk at the Autism Law Summit that the T was missing from EPSDT when it came to autism, because Medicaid was covering screening and diagnosis, but then they weren't covering ABA in a lot of the treatments. So there were some legal cases in a couple states that really spurred a lot of states to add ABA and add other treatments for autism under their EPSDT program, because it became very clear from the science and from the consensus among the medical community that ABA and speech, OT, PT, and other treatments were the level of care, were the standard of care, are medically necessary for children with autism. One thing to keep in mind is that the EPSDT regulations do state that all medically necessary services need to be covered under EPSDT for a child. So this would be under age 20, even if those services are not specifically listed in the state plan. So ABA does not have to be listed in your particular state's Medicaid plan in order for it to be covered under EPSDT. And so that's important to know, because we do hear cases where even folks working under the Medicaid agency in a state may say, well, it's not in our state plan, so we can't cover it. We have to change our state plan, and that's not necessarily true. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. Again, states are varying as to their compliance with the federal guidance to cover autism treatment. And to cover all medically necessary autism treatment under EPSDT. They didn't come out and specifically say ABA had to be covered, but the guidance is clear that if a treatment is considered to be medically necessary, it does need to be covered. And ABA now has what are called Category 1 codes from the American Medical Association. That was years in the making, and that is one very clear sign that the medical community in our country recognizes that as a medically necessary treatment. So, it's really very difficult to make the case that ABA is not a medically necessary treatment anymore, or that it's educational, or that it's experimental. It's got those Category 1 CPT codes. So that is not something that is handed out lightly. There's quite a process to make that happen. And that was successfully done because of the evidence basis to ABA treatment. So that's something to also keep in mind in your advocacy work, and also in looking at getting your own loved ones coverage for autism treatment. Some developments in Medicaid coverage on the adult side. As I said, the EPSDT coverage for children is relatively cut and dry, even though there are states that are still not complying fully with that requirement. But now states are also looking at ABA for adults under their Medicaid coverage. Arizona and Mexico are covering ABA for adults under their Medicaid plans. And just a few months ago in my state here in Indiana, there was a Medicaid-based lawsuit that basically stated that it violates the Americans with Disabilities Act to deny all coverage for ABA for all adults. And the plaintiff in the case, I worked with the family on their appeal to Medicaid, and then the family, the dad is a lawyer. So he decided to represent his adult with autism and filed suit against the state under the ADA, and presented information about that ABA is the only mental health service that his loved one can access based on being nonverbal and also based on intellectual disability, but also argued that it was a violation of ADA just to have this blanket exclusion and not have medical necessity criteria to determine which adults should qualify for ABA coverage under Medicaid. And so that was successful. It is currently under appeal at the state level, but we are very hopeful that this will open the door for adult coverage in our state. And right now, our state is currently covering adults with autism who meet medical necessity criteria. And we've seen that especially if the adult has a primary commercial insurance that covers ABA. And so their primary insurance is covering ABA. So we've encouraged families that if your primary commercial insurance is covering ABA for your adult loved one with autism, file for coverage with Medicaid as secondary and include that approval with your filing to demonstrate that their primary insurance has already determined that this is medically necessary. It's really hard for an insurance carrier as secondary to deny a service when the primary insurance has already determined that it's medically necessary. So that may be something that advocates may want to try elsewhere. It's right now working in Indiana with this, with that current lawsuit going on. So that's kind of breaking news here, and I'll, hopefully give you an update in a few months as to how that is going. Kind of a little bit in summary, some of the keys to determining whether or not autism and ABA is covered, and also some of the keys to advocating for making sure that that is adequately being covered by your plan, are these elements to insurance coverage. You want to look at your commercial plan language, look to see if they are offering mental health benefits. Federal and state mental health parity laws may apply to a plan if they are covering mental health services as part of their health plan. So that's kind of the key to mental health parity. The health plan, not an employee assistance program, not a non-medical insurance program, but the health plan itself needs to offer mental health services. And then that typically triggers federal and state mental health parity laws to apply. The other thing to take into consideration with state mental health parity laws is there are certain states that have carved autism out of their state mental health parity law. So those two laws, the federal and the state, have to work together. So you will definitely want to check with your state-based insurance department and also your state-based advocates about your state, its mental health parity law, and how that interacts with federal mental health parity law, and whether or not autism is carved out specifically. If it's not specifically carved out, then it's supposed to be in. So there would have to be a carve out. So you'll definitely want to ask that for your state as well. As I just alluded to, the Americans with Disabilities Act is becoming a tool for advocates and attorneys to look at how autism is being covered and whether or not it's being covered in a way that is discriminatory. And in some cases, there is a clause in the Affordable Care Act. The PPACA is kind of the acronym for the large Affordable Care Act law. And that law not only set up those marketplaces, but it also created, as I talked about previously, several different regulations that apply to many different health plans. And so if your health plan is supposed to be Affordable Care Act compliant, this non-discrimination clause may apply to your plan, and it may be a way to be able to advocate for adding autism coverage if it is not already in there, because it might be something that should be in there in order to comply with the Affordable Care Act law for that plan. Again, autism health reform laws on the state level also come into play if you're in a fully insured plan. And so that's the importance of knowing whether you're fully insured, self-insured, or have a different type of health insurance plan, kind of regardless of your carrier. And then I spoke a little bit about federal employees, but I also do want to add that TRICARE does cover autism and ABA therapy. TRICARE has its own rules about health insurance coverage for TRICARE recipients, and their autism their autism coverage and their ABA coverage is through their TRICARE demonstration project. And so that has kind of its own process in and of itself. And so if that is something that is going to be your main source of coverage, you'll definitely want to work with your benefits people and also local state advocates and Autism Speaks, national advocates, the Autism Legal Resource Center, to get the most up-to-date information about what is going on with the demonstration project and what their current benefit levels look like. I believe currently the project benefits are being administered by Humana. And so their personnel is involved in administering that plan and in developing the medical necessity criteria and coverage criteria for that as well. And as a TRICARE recipient, you should be able to access the information about the demonstration project on the website. And I will see if I can get that link and have that put up there as well, because that's a specialized type of coverage. Then I wanted to just open it up for, I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I wanted to, we have some time, good. Wanted to open it up for questions, and also wanted to just kind of put on one slide some of the resources that I refer families to most commonly to get information about autism and ABA coverage as they're looking at their own health plan options. And then also my email, in case you want to email me directly with any questions or concerns or looking for a resource, please feel free to do that. And so if anyone has any questions, if you want to put them in the chat, or I think at this point you can unmute yourself, and I'd be happy to address them as best I can. And if I don't know, I'll try to find out. Now, it's a lot of information to cover about a lot of different types of health plans in a very short period of time. So I appreciate your patience with that, and with kind of all the back and forth among the different types of plans.
I have a question if nobody else has any. It's kind of it's an oddly specific question. So if you're not looking for very specific questions, feel free to just tell me to shut up.
Oh, no worries.
I'm in West Virginia, and the state employees insurance agency has a policy. It's called, the agency is PEIA, Public Employee Insurance Agency. There's an autism mandate for West Virginia. There's $30,000 for the first 3 years, $2,000 per month after, which obviously doesn't go nearly as far as it needs to.
Right.
And PEIA up until recently has been following that mandate. Last year, however, they passed a mental health parity law for West Virginia specifically that does apply to PEIA. And it ties, the language in the law ties it directly to a specific section of the federal mental health parity law. And however, PEIA has been getting exemptions from the federal mental health parity law, and they still applied for one. So I'm trying to figure out, since the state law ties directly to the language in a certain section of the federal law, would that hold sway, or since they have an exemption, would that hold sway? And it's, you know, I realize that's a very detailed question, and you probably have
No, that's a great question. That is a great question. And I would be remiss if I didn't say I am not an attorney. And so I think that that is going to be, unfortunately, not an advocate question, but a question for an attorney who is very familiar with West Virginia law and how it interacts with federal law, because it will, since the state law does point to the federal law, that kind of gives you kind of one piece of that argument. But then if the PEI, did I say that right? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. If they're filing ongoing exemptions from federal mental health parity law, my question as an advocate for an attorney would be, but does that still lead them to be under your state mental health parity law? And if your state mental health parity law does not carve out autism, then do they need to look at their autism policy to see if it's complying with state law? That would be my question for your state-based attorneys, to look at that and see if there's any way to trigger your state law to get a better change in that policy that they have.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and Shannon's going to get Dan on that too.
Well, it sounds like the North Carolina law, where they have their own state mental health parity,
Mhm.
they all throw the part out that's separate from the federal plan. And so I'm curious.
Yeah, I would imagine that there are several states where the state employees are in a similar situation, and that would be a really good thing for all of us as advocates to know, is if there's a way to leverage that state-based mental health parity law, even if they've filed an exemption from the federal law. So yeah. Yeah, but it sounds like for future advocacy, federal mental health law, ADA, and state mental health parity laws are kind of going to be our best friends in terms of changing some of the limitations on coverage that still exist, that just need to be challenged or negotiated, really. So, any other questions or comments? I know that Shannon will be putting slides up for people to access, and this was recorded and live streamed, and so they will be posted as well, because I know that, with living a life with autism, sometimes just getting through the day is tricky. And so when open enrollment rolls around, we want to make sure that you can access this again and go over it, and have that information at your fingertips just in time when you need it. So thank you so much. If there aren't any other questions, just thank you so much for spending an hour talking insurance with me. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your interest. And we will hopefully see you soon at one of our future events. Take care. Have a wonderful rest of your week.